I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Legislative Updates with John Barker of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 70th District. Most of us get our information concerning the actions of the Kansas Legislature either from some form of media or after the fact, as the legislation either became law or died during the process. Representative John Barker has graciously agreed to take time from his schedule to update pending legislation as the bills are moving through committee to consideration by the House of Representatives. Right after this short break, let's talk with Representative John Barker concerning this week in the Kansas Legislature. Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with John Barker. And John is, of course, the representative from the 70th District. And John, this is our last legislative update for the year because the legislature finally finished. And I understand it went on for
115 days.
That's a long time.
One day less than the record.
Oh, boy. And I thought we would do a summary today, if it's all right with you, because you've been kind enough to come back at different stages and update the progress of it. But now that it's done, now the legislation is complete. Some's passed, some of it failed in committees and voted down and so forth. So where do you want to start with the summary?
Oh, I think there's a little over 400 bills introduced. I think 84 of them became law that the governor has signed. Number of vetoes. But overall, I mean, it was not the longest, but the next to the longest session in history. And what's interesting, I went into the farmhouse restaurant there in Abilene, and on the wall they talk about Lena. Remember Lena used to run the place?
Yeah.
Has her article, but beside it, legislature is closed down 50 days.
Wouldn't that be nice?
I think that was 1975. And we just finished 115 days. It was a long, grueling. Nobody thought it would last that long.
Yeah.
I had no expectations. I think I was very optimistic earlier when I say we're going to be finished in 90 days, and then it went to 100 days. Then it went to 110 days. And members had to come and go because you have other plans. You plan after a certain day that you've got business to take care of and do the different things, and it did last 115 days.
Well, I remember you were frustrated with, and of course I don't want to pick on the Senate, but I guess I will a little bit.
Yeah,
you were frustrated with the Senate that you were sending things up and the Senate wasn't meeting as often, and they were taking longer breaks, and they were just opening and then closing, and it was frustrating because it was delaying the process.
It was. They did come together at the last few days, and that was helpful. But during the early part of session, I think I told the joke was we started in January and the Senate showed up on the 23rd of March because I think that was their first day they passed a bill. But my Senate colleagues, they work hard, but they did leave a lot, and there was some resentment between the House and the Senate because we're always trying to play, who's going to pass a bill first, or they're stripping out our bills, putting their bills in so they can run them back on a concur. Which is a shorter process, and we wanted our bills passed too. So there was a little of that. It's a little tit for tat. So, but overall, we finished.
Well, yeah, and that's a good part. And I know it's kind of frustrating when those delays that occur in there. But remind the folks, what committees are you on, or chairing, or second, or so forth?
Oh, well, I chair one of the three exempt committees. Exempt committees are Appropriations, Tax, Fed and State. I chair the Fed and State Committee, which handles to do with about any issue that you want. We can handle it all. Then I chair the Legislative Post Audit, which is the bipartisan combination committee of both senators and House members. And we do the auditing of all the state agencies or any agency that gets state money. And then I serve on health. I also serve on the Joint Committee on Pensions and Retirement, which is a senator and House members. We meet at the call of the chair. And then as a sideline, I also serve on the Kansas Sentencing Commission, which has to do with sentencing of prisoners, as you well know, felonies to state prisons and trying to manage that population.
And that would be logical, you having been a district judge for 25 years, and so that would certainly make sense. Well, what bills do you kind of want to go back and highlight? I
thought I'd kind of highlight a few bills. One was Senate Bill 83, which was the Women's Right to Know Act. I think we talked about that the last time I was here. It's before they get an abortion, they are supplied certain information presently, they're not supplied that until the actual day of the procedure. They may have 3 or 4 different doctors' names on the list, and one of those, now they get to know who the doctor is. They get to know the year he received his medical degree, whether or not he's been disciplined in any manner by the board of their monitoring board, or the State Board of Healing Arts, or whether or not he's had malpractice insurance and had any suits against him. Just kind of a right to know. If you're going to have a procedure, I know I've had medical procedures. I want to know about my doctor, and now if you're going to have that procedure, you have a right to know.
Where does the person get that paperwork? Does it come through the doctor's office?
It comes through the clinic that has the procedure. They provide it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And there was a large vote on that, and so it was just for those women that are having the procedure, now they are informed.
Yeah, well, certainly. We're going to have to cut away and take a short break. When we come back, we're going to go through some of the legislation that was submitted and passed. You're watching Legislative Update with John Barker. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest John Barker, directly from the Legislature. The Legislature has finished this session after 1 day short of a world record, and it was 115 days, and we are going to go through with Representative Barker some of the legislation that was passed. We've already talked about the women's right to know. And what about the concealed carry? That was a bill you actually sponsored, wasn't it?
It came out of Fed and State initially. Presently we passed a bill a few years ago under what they call the Second Amendment carry, and gave some time periods for certain institutions like hospitals, nursing homes, mental health centers, and campuses to either provide security, or on July 1, they would be allowed to carry their concealed firearms on those areas. The hospitals had come to me back prior to session, and it's just too expensive for them to put those up. It'd be like going into an airport. So I sponsored, had a bill in committee. I sponsored an amendment, which failed in committee, because when you're talking about Second Amendment rights, it's a very tedious situation.
Sure.
So people are very sensitive to those. However, I coordinated with Jim Denning, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and he was able to get a bill out of their Appropriations Committee, or Ways and Means Committee, and passed. And I assured him that if he got it passed, that he'd send it over to me, I would do what we call a concur, which means we just agree with you, and it's a 1 vote. And next to, I think it was like, I don't know, the last day of May. It was a Thursday night, I remember that. They had passed it in the morning. I carried it in the afternoon. I think I spent about an hour and a half issues. There were a number of motions made on it to non-concur or to kill the bill. So we had to play that game for a while. But eventually, I was able to get the House to vote, I think 87 votes, which is past the veto, because I was not sure whether the governor would veto or not veto. It gave me some indication that he may not veto it. So I wanted to have sufficient votes that if it
Just in case.
Just in case. Fortunately, it did pass, and it went to the governor. He let it sit 10 days and did not sign the bill.
Passed automatically.
But then became law without his signature. Mm-hmm. There are other issues with that, but basically, from my perspective, is do you really want to have somebody with a gun in a mental health center?
Yeah, I can understand that.
So.
Yeah, well, that makes sense to me, and I'm sure the two arguments, and you heard them all on the floor, but I'm just kind of using my own common sense with it, is anybody who's in a situation you'd like to be armed. If somebody in a situation just pulls out a gun and there's nobody around to do anything about it, and the flip side of the coin is if you're, like, I'm the judge in municipal court in Abilene, and I'm in a confined little area up there, and so I'm in a confined little area.
That's
and
exactly.
people popping off rounds around the place. It's just, the whole thing is just scary.
Yeah, and a few years ago I carried an amendment on the floor to keep guns out of the courtroom, because you and I both know how explosive those situations, and they could be law-abiding folks, but suddenly when you take their kids away, or something the court has to do on occasion,
you lose your freedom.
Or you lose your freedom, they get a little upset. But it was passed overwhelmingly. I was very happy with that. I know the NRA and I had talked, and we tried to negotiate, and they're good people, the NRA folks. and maybe they didn't fight it as hard as they could have. So I'm thankful for that, and we got it passed. So hospitals, and that will save the hospitals and the mental health centers a lot of money, because they would have had to put that security up.
Yeah, that'd be terribly expensive.
Right.
What do you want to take a look at next?
Well, we got the school finance bill. I had a lot of controversy over that the last few years. That would be Senate Bill 19. I voted for it. It goes back to a formula. It's a little different formula than was in a prior formula that we repealed a few years ago. It adds, I think, $180 million into education, additional funds. It has a transportation weighting, but it did pass. The governor did sign it. It should help some school districts. It did do a few other things. It had to do with the transportation weighting, the career technical. You know, I'm one of those persons that really want to spend money on technical schools. I want to be able to have somebody graduate from high school and not think that if I don't go to college, I won't be successful. You know, you go to a technical school and you learn to be a landscaper, you learn to be a diesel engine mechanic if that's what you want to do. You can make, you know, a lot of money, and you get a job immediately. And I've always thought the education, we always try to focus, got to go to college, you got to go to college, you got to go to college. And no, what you've got to do is get a career that will make you successful
In what you want to do.
In an area that you want to do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
I remember that. I was on a board of directors with K-Tech, and one of the members on it was the president of Boeing out of Wichita. And we would have that conversation. You and I have had it off
Right.
camera at different times. And he would say, college isn't for everybody. And he said, we're in position that if we have high school kids that we can identify that want to come in, be a machinist and stuff, he said, we can work with them their last 6 months of their senior year. And they can walk straight out of high school and come into a better paying job than they will make in a college setting.
Right.
And then when they come back and they're making that in the college setting, because they're not interested in English, they're not interested in college, their field of interest is entirely different than that. And that made sense.
it makes sense to me. I mean, the last class that graduated from the technical school in Salina, the diesel mechanic school, every one of them had a job before they graduated. And one company wanted to come in and hire all of them.
Really?
But some of the kids didn't want to move or whatever, and so they got other jobs. But and they make a good living. Or if you're an electrician or a plumber, we don't have enough of those. And so I want education to kind of look in that area of, you know, what do you want to do, and let us help you get there.
Right.
Instead of saying, you know, you've got to go to college or you won't be successful in life. And so that's basically it. But I think it'll require audits and things. But I think you know, we're providing $1.9 billion in general state funds from the state general fund. I mean, we put a lot of money in education.
That's a tremendous amount going into education. We're going to cut away and take a break. And when we come back, well, let's talk about some more of the legislation that worked its way through, and maybe a little bit more on the school financing.
Okay.
We'll be back right after this break. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. You're visiting with Representative John Barker from the 70th District. The legislature has finished its session, 115 days, 1 day short of the world record. And we were talking about, and not really the world record, but we were talking about school finance before we cut away.
Right.
And I know the court had made a decision that more money was needed, but as I recall from the articles I've read, the court didn't determine how much more, so it left the legislature kind of making a guess. Well, here's an amount we think will work. What's the feeling now?
Well, you know, a couple of years ago, or 4 years ago, we got rid of the old formula because it was just not sustainable. We went to the block grant. The court has found that the block grant was not constitutional. And so we've been working on a new formula, which I think we accomplished that. The court, back the first of the year, February I think it was, they came out with a decision, said that we had to have this or they were going to close schools on 30th of June. We worked hard on it. The chairman of that committee did a great job. We think we met the constitutional muster in this bill. And in fact, the Supreme Court, after we passed the bill and the governor signed the bill, it went to the Supreme Court. They did not make a definitive determination, but they said, we're going to take arguments on this bill. So we're not closing schools on the 30th of June. And so, you know, there are people and some of my colleagues that are in education or on the other party, the minority party, thought we had to put another $1 billion, and that's what their proposal is next year, to bring another $900 million into it.
Into the school finance?
They do. Never enough.
Man, that's a lot of money.
Well, it is, and of course, bottom line, where does that money come from?
Like you've told me before, it comes from the taxpayers.
Comes from the taxpayers, and so we're going to wait and see what the Supreme Court says, because 2/3 of the kids are doing well, and we do better than most states in our education.
Huh.
I think at one point in time we were like number 8 in the nation, but we do have a third, and those are mostly minority students or non-English speaking students that we have in the state. So there's where we maybe want to.
Yeah, I'm assuming that gap's closing pretty quickly.
I think
You had
so.
mentioned about money, the appropriations that came through. There was some finance changes in there for the tax structure.
Taxes were changed. Senate Bill 30, it went through a couple of different times, was either passed or didn't pass, because you can always send them back to conference committee and redo it, and it comes out with the same Senate bill. I remember having some of my Democrat constituents sending me, you got to vote for this Senate Bill 30, and after the vote, I didn't vote for it. I said, well, the minority leader, the Democratic minority even voted against it, so that's okay. Yeah. But bottom line is they changed the tax structure. I've heard it called the Missouri Jobs Plan. Whether that's true, I think that was in the Kansas City Star.
Well, those areas that are in Kansas, they're on the border areas, of course, they're very concerned with it, because anything higher than the right across the line is a problem for them.
It is, and that's the reason we did a couple of things a few years ago. But there are 8 counties bordering Missouri that provide 35% of all retail sales taxes in the state of Kansas. And they provide 40% of all state income taxes. 8 counties along the border. So a bill was passed. It was vetoed by the governor. It was overridden, the veto was. And what it does, and I think they'll put this on a screen a little later.
Yeah, we'll put it up on the screen.
The table, it under $0 to $30,000. These are married filing jointly brackets. It's presently 2.7. Next year it'll be 2.9, and then in 18 it goes to 3.1. From 30 to 60,000, it's presently 4.6. It will go to 4.9, and then it will go to 5.25. If you're making over 60,000, apparently you're rich, because you got the highest bracket. From 60,000 and above, you pay 4.6, going to 5.2, and then it hits 5.7. And to give you a comparison, if I can, Colorado is, and I'm looking at our region, our surrounding states.
Okay.
Colorado looks the best they have a flat tax straight across the board of 4.6 for income taxes, and the lowest of 5 states for their sales taxes is 2.9. Oklahoma's second with a top income bracket of 5% and state sales taxes of 4.5. Third is Missouri, who has the lowest. Their top income tax is 5.5, and they got a 4.225 in their sales taxes. And then Nebraska comes in 4th with the highest bracket of 5.01 for 36,000 and above, 6.84 for 59,000 and above, and state sales taxes are 5.5. But you got to give them credit. They have no sales taxes on food. Last place, Kansas now ranks last with our border states, starting in 18 with 30,000 plus at 5.25. At $60,000, it's 5.7, and our sales taxes is the highest of all the states at 6.5.
And that makes a big difference if you're buying a big ticket item like a new car, a new truck, or
it does.
Something like that. You're gonna take that into consideration as to where you buy. You're not in favor of this, are you?
No, I was not in favor of this. I was in favor of the LLC sub-S's. I'd voted for it twice. But what's interesting is revenues are up. So we may have passed a big tax plan and not need a big tax plan. President Obama has been in office, has left office in January. President Trump is now in office, and we're seeing more economic growth in the country than we've had in the last 7 years.
Yeah, that stock market certainly reflects that.
It does. But the revenues, for example, tax revenues for June, this past month, is $77 million more than predicted in April, and $35 million more than in June of 16. So we're bringing in, over last June, we're bringing in $35 million just in that 1 month. In the fiscal year, which ended June 30th, $73 million over the April adjusted, when they adjusted it in April, the projections, and we're 16.5 more than projected in April. Corporate taxes are up 62 million, which is 162% more than the estimates, or 24 million above last year. Individual income taxes in June were 222 million. Sales taxes were up 11.5 million, or 6.17% above the estimates, or 11 million over last June of 16. So I think that the national economy is picking up, our economy is picking up, and if our economy picks up, we have more revenue. So we may end up next year with this is a $1.2 billion tax increase over 2 years. We could have surplus money. The question is whether the legislature will give it back to the folks that paid it.
Well, I hope so. We've got to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Barker, from the representative from the 70th District. And John, you've been kind enough to come back during the legislative sessions and come back and share with us each time, so that we get the behind the scenes, we get the information that comes out, and we know it in advance, because sometimes when it gets reported in the newspaper, it gets slanted, and you read it and you say, I'm not sure I even understand that. But thank you so much for doing this over the course of this year, coming in and sharing that information. And as always, there's people who will watch your show and they say, well, I don't agree with you. And there's others who will say, I agree with you. Well, that's why we have the whole process as it goes.
Well, thank you, Doug. And we talked about earlier, there are no subjects taboo here. I will talk about subjects that I would disagree with many of my constituents, but if you'll notice, I wore my man enough to wear a pink shirt today.
That's right, you did. And John, thank you. Thank you for doing this throughout this year. Hope you've enjoyed Legislative Updates with John Barker. Thanks for watching.
Hope you have enjoyed this segment of Legislative Updates with John Barker. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker. Tune in next time for another legislative update. Thanks for watching.